Good afternoon or good evening. I think we have every time zone in the United States represented this evening for the third in our Rural Minds Connections webinar series. We are so pleased to have everyone joining us for this. Hard to believe it's our third one already. And I think the word connections really is really appropriate for tonight, because the terrific people that you will be hearing from in just a little bit are all now part of the Rural Minds family, because they came to us through various connections that we've made over the course of the past nearly almost a year, 11 months, almost coming up to a year. But my name is Julie Lux. I'm the Vice President of Communications at Rural Minds, and it is my pleasure to welcome you and to talk a little bit about our subject matter for this evening. As you saw in our opening slide, the subject matter this evening for this webinar is suicide awareness and prevention. And timing is right, because September is Suicide Prevention Month. And tonight we will be focusing on a few important things when it comes to this serious subject. We're going to talk about the importance of confronting the higher risk of suicide in rural communities. Sadly, that is still the case. We are also going to present information on helping to prevent suicide and provide some resources. But we also want to, we're also going to hear from you in a couple of different ways this evening. Now, please note that those of you who've been on these webinars know that confidentiality and your privacy are extremely important to us. So please be assured that no people watching the webinar you will only see the identity of our presenters here at the top of the screen. None of the participants, none of those watching, you will be able to identify, or will they be able to identify other participants. However, you can ask questions a little bit later on. We have a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen here on Zoom, but those will only be seen by the presenters and by me. So again, your identities will be kept confidential. We want to remind you, and if you tuned in a little early, you saw the slide on the screen, but the new 988 number is now working. That is the designated 3-digit dialing code for National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So people can, in crisis, or if you know someone, if one of your loved ones is in crisis, they can call that 988 or chat through 988lifeline.org. So it's important to keep that number in mind. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But again, one of the things we want to do is hear a little bit from you, and we have some poll questions that we're going to be asking you through this webinar. And we're going to start with the first one to get things rolling now. So this question is for you, all of our participants who are watching. On a scale of 0 to 5, how much information do you feel like you have at this time to help prevent suicide? And I think that's great. People are voting. 0 means none, and 5 means you feel like you have all the information that you need. So again, responses are completely anonymous. We appreciate your participation. And now I am pleased to turn the screen over to the founder and chairman of Rural Minds. Rural Minds, by the way, is a 501c3 not-for-profit and focused on confronting the mental health challenges specific to rural America and the stigma surrounding mental health illness. So with that, Jeff Winton, welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Julie, and welcome everyone. We're thrilled to have you with us this evening. I know some of my own family is joining us, and I'm so happy to have them along with the rest of you who are representing communities across this country. I think we even do have some people internationally that are participating. My name is Jeff Winton, as Julie said, and I am a multi-generational dairy farmer in the beautiful Lake Erie country of upstate New York. as I was telling some of the other panelists earlier today, this is snow country up here. We're south of Buffalo, and the springs and summers and falls are beautiful, but the winters are not for the faint of heart. If you like to ski, if you like to snowmobile, if you like to ice fish, this is a place to be. But to give you an idea, we get so much snow here that here on our dairy farm, even if we wanted to turn the cows out during the wintertime, normally the fences are all covered with snow. You can't even see the fences. That's how deep the snow is. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. This organization, Rural Minds, was first thought about back 10 years ago. On September 1st of 2012, my oldest nephew was married, and he was the first in the family in that generation to get married. It was a very happy occasion. It was one of those family events that you look forward to and you remember for many, many years. Less than 48 hours following that, on September 3rd, his younger brother, Brooks, died by suicide. And as you can imagine, it caught the entire family and the entire community off guard because, first of all, you never expect a suicide. And in his case, he didn't necessarily show the family or his friends, and he had tons of friends, any signs or any indication that he was struggling. But those of you who come from rural areas, who come from small towns, who come from farms like I do, know that there's still a stigma attached to mental illness and suicide ideation and substance use disorder in small towns. It still exists in cities and suburban areas as well, but it's still much more prevalent in rural areas like where we are. So when my nephew died, and we were sitting in the pastor of the Little United Methodist Church in our town of 500 people, talking to the pastor about his service, he point blank asked us, so what do you want to say about this? How much detail do you want to give? Because we had people that we were close to who basically said, you're not going to talk about this as a suicide, right? You're not going to admit what happened. And my dear mother, who is now deceased, who raised my nephew and his brother and sister, with tears rolling down her face, looked at the pastor straight in the eyes with her beautiful blue eyes and said, "Of course, Pastor, we're going to talk about it. It's about time that we confront this epidemic in this small farming town, and we're going to talk about this in detail." So I was honored to be asked to give the eulogy at Brooks's funeral. And so we did go into quite a bit of detail about what led up to his death and what the family was dealing with. After the funeral was over, we had dozens of people lined up waiting to greet our family. And many of them shared then their stories with us. They said, "We're glad someone is finally talking about this because enough is enough." And then they started sharing their stories with us. At that point, the seed was planted for Rural Minds. And 10 years later, and it took us a while to make sure that there was a need, that we were prepared, that we weren't going to be duplicating any other efforts that are out there, we launched this, as Julie said, 11 months ago. You're going to be hearing from Monica and Nathan, who I'm sure will be giving you some statistics. And I will not go into a lot of detail there because I want to give them ample opportunity to tell you about the good work they're doing and their own stories. But just a couple of details. Again, being a dairy farmer here, one thing that I think is quite shocking to a lot of people is that the number of farmers who die by suicide is 6 times greater than any occupation except for miners and construction workers. And obviously many miners live in rural areas, and we're not just focused on farmers, but miners are in these small towns, as are a lot of construction workers, but 6 times greater, which is just astounding. The suicide rate amongst farmers has risen 40%, 40% over the last 2 decades. Those of you involved in agriculture, especially those of you who farm, know that it's a tough life. You're dependent on a lot of things that are out of your control, the weather, the commodity prices, other things that happen that are unforeseen. And you're constantly dealing to try to make the milk check go to the next month, the beef check, whatever your commodity is. One thing that I've learned through this work is that of every dollar spent in the food supply chain in this country, only 15%, 15 cents, I should say, which I guess is 15% out of a dollar goes to the farmer. The rest all goes to the middle people that are involved in agriculture. So there is a growing need to address what's happening in this country. And we're just thrilled that we have the partners such as Monica, Nathan, and Mary, who are with us tonight, who will give you their perspective. I'd like to thank the team from Rural Minds who've been working tirelessly with me, not only to prepare for this particular event, but just to get the organization launched and growing. One of our very greatly valued partners is the National Grange. Those of you from rural America know that the Grange was founded in 1867. It's the largest agricultural fraternity in the world. And those of you who grew up in small towns know that there are Grange halls throughout this great country where the community meets. So the National Grange is one of our first, and I dare to guess will always be one of our most special partners we have. And I'm very pleased tonight to introduce you to a representative of the Grange. We have Mary Rapar, who is the master, which is a big deal in the Grange, the master of Grange number 121 in Stevenson, Washington. And Mary presides at all the meetings in the Grange, and to see that all the officers and members of the committees appointed perform their respective duties. So Mary has a special heart for this work. And we're just delighted, Mary, that you're joining us from the other side of the country, from where I'm calling in from. So Mary, it's all yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate all that you all have done here. I'm the master for Grange number 121 in Stevenson, Washington. And I heard about ruralminds.org through our patrons letter from the our National Grange. And so I called Rural Minds and asked that we have this program presented in our areas because they do support mental health in rural America. So this is how this program came about. At our Grange in Stevenson, we are focused on bringing sustainable practices to our community through educational hands-on programs that help our community and its members become more resilient on several fronts. In addition to our commitment to building sustainable, environmentally sound agricultural practices, this year our community resiliency theme is actually human resilience. We've all been through COVID for a few years now, and we felt it was time to work on our human resilience. We recognize the importance of the Rural Suicide Awareness and Prevention Program to raise awareness about the very, very debilitating effects of suicide on rural communities. And it's a very emotional issue, and I'm so glad that you all are participating in it tonight. Our aim is to help our community members build a foundation of lasting resilience, and by providing programs, materials, services, and resources to prevent suicides in rural communities. Our Grange, Stevenson Grange number 121, looks forward to participating in this program and future programs too, and raising awareness of rural suicide prevention. So, raising awareness of rural suicide everywhere. So thank you all for participating tonight, and I hope to learn a lot.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you. You were the catalyst that started this whole discussion. So we really appreciate you reaching out initially, and we can tell that this is near and dear to your heart, as my mother used to say. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for bringing this important subject to the forefront for us. So before we get to our next speaker, we wanted to pull up quickly our results of our first poll and let you know that, and thank you to everybody who participated. Interesting, it kind of looks like we're in the middle. A lot of people feel like they have some information. 9% think they don't have any at this point. 6% feel like they have enough. So it appears there is still a need for this important suicide prevention information, and we're going to continue to talk about that with our next guest. So thanks again for participating. We'll have another poll coming up later, but right now I would like to introduce Nathan Lawson. Nathan is a rancher. He is a farmer, but the other thing that's particularly interesting and why we're so delighted to have him here is that Nathan is very much a leader in his community, from the time that he was a youth minister to participating in the Kentucky Agriculture Roundtable, charged with the task of raising awareness about mental health and suicide prevention in his home state of Kentucky. So Nathan, I could go on singing your praises for a while because you have accomplished a great deal, you and your wife, Wanda, and your 3 little ones, but we'd like to hear from you. So I'm going to just ask Nathan a few questions to start things rolling here. Most importantly, Nathan, tell us what motivated you to become actively involved in rural suicide awareness and prevention?
Well, Julie, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this webinar and to also get to know the team at Rural Minds. Jeff and Chuck, thank you all so much for the chance to get to know you better. And, you know, when I think and reflect about my motivation in getting involved in raising awareness about mental health and suicide prevention in our rural communities, it really connects back to you know, a couple of memories that I have. One in particular, as a young high school student in our small community here in Central Kentucky, and the loss of a classmate to suicide during that time. You know, those are things in life that send such ripples across the lives of our communities that we never forget them, and they sincerely leave a mark on us. You know, this person was a friend and a friend to many, and it was very unexpected. But as I fast forward through my timeline and my interest in this topic, we come to a period in time when I served as a student minister in a church in our local community. And, you know, as a bivocational minister, farming in the community, but also serving as a student minister in a local church, I had the opportunity to interact with many of our students on multiple levels, and several of the young men were helping us on the farm at the time. And I remember, Julie, I remember where I was the night that I got a phone call from one of the young men who had said that his friend was talking about things that he was very concerned about. And that was enough of a red flag for he and I to discuss further. And you know, long story short, family challenges, struggles in relationships within the home was leading this young man that was not more than a freshman in high school to speak of potentially harming himself. And so, you know, the beauty in that scenario is that it took little more than a phone call to the father and the mother to be able to really help serve as catalyst to repair that relationship and really see a beautiful thing come out of that scenario. But, you know, ultimately, I think that the motivation is to help continue to beat the drum to normalize the conversation in our rural communities. And I think that we've done a good job and made some great strides in that regard, but we're just getting started, and we need to continue to band together to help become a strong voice, a consistent voice that resonates throughout the calendar year for mental health and suicide prevention, not only in the farming community, but in rural communities at large.
That's a wonderful story, Nathan, and thank you, because I think it goes to the question that some people are asking is, can suicide really be prevented? And in that instance, yes, you were able to intercede because one of this young man's friends spoke up. And a lot of times people are probably afraid to do that. And, one of the things that Jeff alluded to, and I think was probably maybe part of the case in that situation, is that the stressors, the challenges in rural families, it's not just the adults, it affects the entire family. So can you talk a little bit about some of those stressors, and we know there's some that are unique to the farming and the ranching community that maybe people in urban areas don't realize.
Yes, ma'am, very much so. And I kind of categorize our stressors into a couple of areas. There are so many uncontrollables, and we often think of those uncontrollables when we consider the challenges that our farmers and ranchers face, and those in rural communities. Those uncontrollables are the weather. For a farmer or rancher, they are the markets. You see often, in fact, my father-in-law, who has been a lifelong farmer, has a plaque on his kitchen wall that says, the farmer is the only one who buys in bulk, pays retail, and sells everything at wholesale and pays the freight both ways, and so that's kind of a joke on the scenario, but the reality, it is very true. We have very little control over our commodities and what we gain for those commodities at sale time. And so those uncontrollables is a very long list, and we tend to focus on that. But then when we consider the things that are maybe more controllable, or possibly that we feel the burden of control on in our lives as farmers, ranchers, and rural community members, is those family responsibilities. We have family responsibilities, and with that, the wants and needs of our family. We have community obligations. We really have placed upon ourselves an identity to try to uphold and maintain. And some of that is not self-inflicted, because many of those in the community see farmers and ranchers, and particularly rural individuals, as very strong, very self-dependent and very able to take care of their own needs. And that is a very good thing. That is something that does make us who we are, but at the same time, it can create some barriers to us in our ability to be honest and vulnerable when our challenges become real in our own minds. And so one of the things that I think that we have to be mindful of in the future, that I think that has become a real challenge for farmers and ranchers in particular, is the consumer's perspective of farmers and ranchers. And I think that that's something that I feel like is fairly new to this generation, or maybe my generation of agriculturalists, in that never before has there been such a time where the consumer really has begun to be more interested in the products that are coming from the farm. And we feel that pressure of legislative challenges that may impact us directly on the farm and our ability to gain, valuable income for our families. And so I think that consumer perspective is one that we're going to have to be mindful of going forward as a potential pressure that is out of the control of the farmers and ranchers and rural community members as well.
I was doing some interviews at NCBA a couple of years ago, and I was hearing that very same thing that you're talking about, that never before, and probably in history, is the consumer had such a voice in what their product, what their food, how their food is grown, how it's raised. So that does add yet another pressure. But one thing that we've heard about for a long time that contributes to what you were saying about the people in rural America, the farmers, the ranchers, having this, having to be self-reliant, having this image of self-reliance, but in some ways that can play into the stigma of not wanting to admit admitting that you have a mental illness could be admitting to a weakness. So, and of course, that's one of the goals at Rural Minds, is to help to reduce that stigma. So how can that be done? What would you say from your perspective can we do to continue to help decrease that stigma?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's spot on, and something that I appreciate greatly about the focus of Rural Minds is to try to help mitigate that challenge. We tend to be, you know, John Wayne. We almost apply that to ourselves, and so that self-reliance and that ability to meet our own needs, and all the while having that image. So much of our identity is wrapped up in our ability to be successful in rural communities and on the farm level and in our ranches. And so that presents significant challenges. And it's really ironic when we think about that, because what goes with that is a raw honesty. When I think about, our family, I have a 16-year-old daughter, Julie, and she has a John Wayne calendar hanging on her wall in her bedroom.
Oh my God.
She loves those John Wayne movies, from the oldest to the to the True Grit. But what we like about that character is his honesty. He's raw and he's honest. And when I think about that, in that stigma around us in agriculture and in rural communities, that's one of the things that sets our identity apart. Is we tend to be very honest, and sometimes to a fault with regard to our way of doing things. But unfortunately, that honesty doesn't break the boundaries of our own minds and our own thoughts at times. And when I think about what honesty looks like, to me, the most resilient, the strongest individuals that I know are the most honest. But likewise, the most honest people I know are the most vulnerable. And that vulnerability is a challenge for us in rural communities and in farming communities. We struggle with that because we feel that it shows weakness. But if there was one thing that I could share with anyone, it's to say that really is a measure of true strength. When we are willing to be honest enough about our own challenges. And so I think that being able to have these conversations and being able to go back to our own communities and talk about the stigma and talk about the need to continue to address that in a positive way, in a way that helps people pull down the defenses, so to speak, and be able to be vulnerable and to be that strong and honest, will help us get way down the road in helping prevent suicide in our rural communities.
I think that's just absolutely a wonderful sentiment. We agree with you wholeheartedly, and everyone at Rural Minds is doing their part, and we greatly appreciate all that you're doing. Unfortunately, our time just goes by so quickly on these because it's so interesting. But before we leave you, Nathan, is there anything else important that you'd like to talk about, you'd like to share with our audience before we move on to talk to Monica?
Yes, ma'am. One thing that I would like us to all keep in mind is the next generation, because I think that if we do that, we will help guard ourselves against the challenges that suicidal ideation and mental health challenges can present, because we have a next generation to prepare for our roles. And with that, we have to keep in mind their own challenges. Recent statistics indicate that roughly 6,000 young people, are committing suicide daily in the nation. And that is an increase in the last 5 years. And so that's very concerning. And with that, I think that one key tool for us that we have at our disposal is the opportunity to gain some training. If we're proactive and we're willing to take that time to equip ourselves to have conversations with our friends and neighbors. And so the QPR training that will be mentioned later is one in particular resource that I've participated in myself that's been very valuable to me. And I would encourage others to seek that resource out. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that as the webinar goes on. But ultimately, I'd just like to encourage each one here to be a good friend, but also be willing to allow someone else to be a good friend to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. That's great. And yes, one of the things we talked about at the top of the webinar was solutions, and the QPR training we will touch on a little bit, and probably more so in future webinars as well. But that's really a staggering statistic that I think we're all maybe a little taken aback by. 6,000 young people. So thank you for all that you do, and for taking time to be with us this evening. So thank you again, Nathan. And we're going to move on here because we want to get to Monica in just a minute. First, wanted to talk about the fact our good partners at the Grange recently conducted a survey with Morning Consult, and they polled 1,000 rural voters and found that 85% of respondents strongly support or somewhat support providing educational programs and material for rural youth. This goes right into what Nathan was just telling us. Rural youth and residents to access resources and services available that address those rural mental health challenges. So we have another poll question for you all now. What types of resources do you feel are the most helpful in addressing rural mental health challenges and suicide prevention? You can pick as many out of this list as you think would be of benefit, but this will be very helpful. Not only is it interesting, but it will be helpful to Rural Minds and the National Grange in the programs that we are developing together. So while folks are providing their thoughts and their input on that, I'm going to move on, and because I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Monica Kramer McConkey has had 25 years of experience in behavioral health. She's been a counselor, a program supervisor, and an administrator, has a master's degree in counseling, and is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Minnesota. Her focus through her career has been to increase access to mental health services and remove the stigma that we've just been talking about, and to increase the understanding of the dynamics that lead to farm stress and the impact that has on farm families. So I think what Nathan was saying, and Monica, what you have to share with us, it just ties in together so beautifully. So I am, again, delighted to be able to welcome you, Monica McConkey. Please share your great information with us.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I am very happy to be here with you all tonight. I could have listened to Jeff and Nathan talk for the whole hour, sharing their insights and experiences, and really great things that you will probably hear echoed a bit in the information that I share. So as Julie said, I have been in the mental health field for a long, long time. I have worked in various roles, from a school-based mental health therapist to an agency director to a behavioral health business development director at a psychiatric hospital. In those 25 years, all have been in rural areas of primarily Minnesota and North Dakota. However, it'll be 3 years ago, actually on October 1st, so coming up on my 3-year anniversary, I was able to start my own business, which focuses really exclusively on rural mental health with a specialization in mental health in agriculture. And so I work with farmers and ranchers every day. I grew up on a farm in northwestern Minnesota. It's currently a 5th generation operation with my parents' brother and son full-time on the farm. So I grew up in FFA and 4-H and all of that really good, that good stuff that comes with being a farm kid, right? But as Nathan was alluding to, there's a lot of unique stressors for youth in general, and as we're talking about today, for our rural and farm kids that, you know, I'm just not even really going to have time to touch on today. But I work with farm youth, farm couples, female, male farmers and ranchers, and it's just such an honor for me to be a part of their lives and helping them sort through things that are really difficult and causing them significant amounts of stress or anxiety or depression or relationship problems. As far as my involvement in the area of suicide, I touch on it every day. Not a day goes by that I am not doing prevention work, intervention work, or postvention work. And so the topic is very near and dear to my heart. It is preventable. And I will echo that arming ourselves with trainings is the best way. It's kind of like QPR, like CPR. If we don't take the class, we don't know the skills when someone is needing CPR. And so we take the class to learn the skills. Same thing with QPR, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So very good to be with you. And we're going to run through a few slides, a few topics. Some I will gloss over because Nathan really touched on them. And then we should have time for some questions afterwards. So first of all, just touching on barriers to mental health in rural areas. We know that accessibility is a barrier. We know that rural areas are underserved, especially for specialty healthcare and psychiatry. We know that rural residents have to travel long distances to receive services, and they are less likely to have insurance coverage for mental health and substance use treatment. Just ran into this with a farmer just this past weekend. He really was in a tough place, a dangerous place with alcohol consumption that has been a chronic problem for him. Myself and the family intervened, and to find him a residential treatment placement that his insurance would cover took hours of my time and the family's time making calls and waiting for calls back. And it's hard. It's not like we have treatment centers all around us in these rural areas. So accessibility, availability, chronic shortages. There are many more healthcare providers and professionals in urban centers than in rural places. And we know, like with school-based therapy or mental health, some of these little districts, there is no way they can support mental health services in their school. So sometimes they're shared among many districts and maybe have a half a day a week in a district in some of our rural settings, if that. So we know availability is an issue. And then, as has already been talked about, we know stigma is an issue in our rural areas, that this just by virtue of everyone knowing everybody, people knowing what other people drive, there's a lack of the ability to be anonymous in rural areas and in small communities. And farmers, Nathan alluded to this, farmers have a really strong need to appear like they kind of have it together, that they can handle things, and they do. They fix things. That's what they spend much of their day doing, fixing things, accomplishing tasks. And so when it comes to appearing vulnerable or seeking help, that is really tough for a lot of our farmers. So other factors that impact mental health in rural areas is that we have less opportunity for education. So I could go to Minneapolis and probably every day there's a QPR training I could find. It's different in these rural areas, and we sometimes have to travel to these trainings for an hour, 2 hours. So limited educational opportunities, not just suicide prevention, but mental health overall. We have lower income, lower levels of employment, higher rates of suicide that have been talked about. And there's some stats here from 2017 from the CDC. We have a higher percentage of the population is 65 years and older. And when we talk about our farmers that are transitioning off the farm, a lot of stress and feelings of hopelessness, loss of purpose in that population. And then, of course, in general, just the geographic and social isolation that comes from being in rural areas impacts mental health as well as accessing mental health services. So let's dig a little bit deeper into farm stress and the factors that cause stress on the farm. Nathan did a great job touching on these, so I'm just going to say a few things. We have those uncontrollable factors. Jeff talked about that too. Definitely at the top of the list. A lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, a lot of depression over things that are happening that are outside of the farm family's control. Agriculture in general is a high injury occupation. So if you know farmers, you probably know farmers that are missing a finger or two, that have been attacked by a bull, that have rolled a four-wheeler, that have had some type of injury due to a farm accident. We also know that I think the last statistics I saw for farm youth who die in farm-related accidents is 300 per year in our country. So there is a lot of trauma on the farm with death and injury and accidents. The isolation we talked about, there's intense competition between farmers for land, purchased and rented. Another reason they don't want to appear vulnerable, right? We need to look like we have our act together so nobody else can, kind of get that land away from us. Competency, things are computerized. Caring for livestock has become very complex. I just helped drive grain cart for wheat harvest a couple weeks ago, and in the tractor, there's literally a computer screen. And so when I'm on the phone with my brother, just saying, what gear do I go in and what lever does this and this, he says, "You see that computer screen in front of you?" And I say, "Yes." And he says, "Don't touch it." So I'm like, okay. But when you look at the average age of our farmers being 60, that increased need to become competent with technology is a huge stressor. And of course, we have income that's not certain. There's not PTO that you can take when you're not feeling well. It is all very uncertain. Transition and succession planning, huge stressors that lead to internal family relationships that are extremely difficult, as well as that loss of hope. If the farm isn't staying in the family, there's that loss of legacy, a lot of grief issues around transition and succession planning. And then the barriers, which we have talked about. So warning signs, let's just talk for a couple minutes on warning signs. When I am working with my clients, my farm kids, my farmers, farm spouses, my antenna are always up for warning signs, for anything that just doesn't quite seem right or doesn't quite seem like it's them. And this list really can apply to almost any group as far as warning signs, if people are isolating, if their mood is changing. But a couple that I just want to pinpoint for our farmers is if you see or hear about plans or an abrupt sale of land or livestock or equipment, and that didn't seem like it was really in the plans for that operation. Seems like it was a change from the direction that farm was heading. Warning sign. if a farm site or fence lines or equipment are falling into disrepair and that's not how that farm has typically functioned, warning sign. If there's an increase in substance use, and I will tell you honestly, I get calls from other farmers at the local bars saying, I think you need to call and check on this farmer because their drinking patterns are very different. And it's the other friends around them at the bar, ironically, that notice that. So changes in substance use, family exhibiting stress, are the kids exhibiting stress? And that's a change for them. So maybe they're using substances, or they're shutting down at school, or they're dropping out of 4-H or FFA or extracurricular sports. That's all warning signs that something is going on. And I can give a little example. I have to be careful with all my storytelling because I run out of time. But I had been meeting with a farmer for a while. He actually is a rancher. He raises beef cattle. And his 40-year-old son recently killed in an ATV accident. No other children to continue the farm. So he was just talking about his sense of hopelessness and overwhelm. And I was hearing these things. And then he said that he had sold all of his Springer heifers. I think that's the right term. The cattle that would have had babies the next year to keep his herd growing, right? And immediately inside of me, like these little red flags went off. And so when I talk about warning signs, it's really knowing that farmer, kind of understanding their mindset and how they function, how their family functions, and then listening and watching for clues, really, verbal and nonverbal, that indicate that they're struggling. Okay. So when I work with farmers, I work on, and when I say farmer, again, this is all encompassing: rancher, female, male, kids. I work on a lot of different things with them. Primarily, one is building protective factors. It's what can we set up around ourselves so that when those really hard days come, or when we are feeling hopeless, we have a good spiritual protective factor that we can fall back on. We have good social supports. We have good physical health practices that we're doing. And we have ways that we can cognitively get a handle on our thoughts and emotions. So those are the protective factors, as well as other things: relaxation, mindfulness, just being present and reaching out, not isolating and staying alone, but talking to someone. Okay, last part I'm going to touch on when we get into really wanting to make a difference in our rural communities. It truly is all about partnership. There's lots of great trainings out there. These are just 4 of the ones I hear about the most and have participated in. There's mental health first aid for adults and youth. There is QPR, which we referred to. That's only an hour, 1 hour. Super simple. Safe talk trainings, assist trainings. And then I also like to do trainings with rural healthcare providers and behavioral health providers and people in ag business, just about what to look for as far as warning signs and how to understand the mindset of our farmers and ranchers. So when we get them into our office, we can spot the warning signs and we can build good rapport with them and keep them coming back. So a couple of examples I wanted to throw out.
Before you go off the resources for just a second, because this is also interesting and such great information. But when you talk about, like Nathan talked about QPR and you've mentioned it, this is something that anyone can avail themselves of. And if they were interested, how would they go about it?
So QPR specifically is for anyone, I think 16 years and older, and you can look online is kind of the best way to do it. Look online or either online trainings or in-person trainings in your area. Any of those, I'll go back to that. Any of those you could Google and find trainings in your area. You can go to your state's NAMI website, so National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they will, a lot of them have trainings listed and locations, or they're virtual. Your extension offices, some of them host trainings. So yeah, just kind of keep eyes and ears open. Often public health or the school district might also host trainings like this.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to let you conclude because we have a bunch of questions for you. So we want to
Okay, I'm going to go quick. I'll just give one example. Let me see. I'll give this example. So when I talk about rural communities and it being really a partnership or a collaborative approach, I'm talking about all of these different entities. Who can you reach out to and get them on board to help really get the information out in the community? I'll give you just one quick example. I got a call from a little tiny town in central Minnesota from the fire department who wanted to do QPR. And so they had gone on the website, they found a QPR trainer, which was me. We held the training in the parish hall. The ladies of the church had cookies and coffee, and the mayor's in the front seat. The priest and other clergy were right there. School staff were present. It was definitely a community approach, which is so valuable. So just throwing that out. I will have to skip this just because we're running out of time. Whoops, there we go. This is my contact information. I will just put that out there for anyone who wants to get a hold of me. I'm happy to talk through things with you. So with that, sorry, that became a rush.
Oh no, well, so much good information, but we do want to give folks a chance to ask questions. So don't go away, Monica, because I'm very quickly going to give folks the results from the last poll, so we can see what people think about the kinds of resources that they need. And I think probably number one here, I have to look in to read the small print, but everybody, you're talking about training and everybody's saying, yes, the majority, 85% of the people would like training, but also videos of shared experiences and mental health support groups. So lots of resources. And thank you, Monica, for talking about some of those, but we're going to get to questions here in just a second. But first, I'm going to toss up our final poll question of the evening. And that is on a scale, we're back to a scale of 1 to 5. This is the same question we asked you at the beginning of the webinar. So do you feel like you have more information now than you did at the beginning of this webinar? I certainly know that I would say yes on that, but please take a minute to answer that question for us. And while we're doing that, I'm going to start with you, Monica. They're kind of the same thing, but one thing, this is actually for us. It says, where can I access a recording of this presentation? Yes, it will be on the Rural Minds website. So it takes usually a couple of days to get it up, but that will be on the Rural Minds website. You'll be able to hear Monica's good presentation. Somebody asked how they could access your PowerPoint presentation, since you provided us so much good information.
Oh, I can, if I could send it to you or Chuck or the crew at Rural Minds, then you can certainly share that out however it works best for you. Or people can always email me directly and I can share that with them as well.
Excellent, excellent. Watch the Rural Minds website, folks. We will keep you up on that. And maybe we can post those poster slides to our website. So we'll work with Monica on that to see if we can get that done, because there was such a wealth of information in a short period of time. But here's Monica, when it comes to mental health and addictions, when you have a community that is very strong in the not in my backyard mindset, what do you recommend to help get people to actually start to buy in for the need for services in a community?
I think stories are really powerful, and people being vulnerable to tell their stories of struggle, I think is really powerful in a small community. And one of the slides I was going to show and didn't have time was my dad. I actually kind of drug him up to be on a podcast because in the 80s, he really struggled with anxiety. And him sharing that on that podcast, the only reason he ever went to see a counselor was because someone shared with him that they were. And now he shared his story, which has impacted people to reach out and see. So I think we can't underestimate the power of being vulnerable and telling stories, so that it's not just them that are struggling, it is us and it is our community. So opening up, normalizing, telling stories, talking about struggles, I think are really important first steps.
That's a great comment. And I think it harkens back to what Jeff was saying about how his mother said, share our story, share Brooke's story. And then all of a sudden, all these people opened up to share theirs as well. So I think that underscores what you were just saying. Nathan, I have a question for you here. Says, what were the steps you took to intervene to prevent the suicide of the person you discussed? Any tips for what worked and how you approach that person?
That's a good question, Julie. Thank you. So I think I want to keep in mind that this was a student in our student ministry at our local church. And so, first and foremost, and I had an obligation to contact the parents, absolutely, to make them aware of the scenario and of the challenges that he was facing. And so, but my first phone call was to him directly. And I think that having a relationship with him that was one of mutual respect and rapport is the first step. We talked about being a good friend and being willing to have a good friend. And so that open door allowed for me to have a little bit more candid conversation of just checking in on him. How you doing? I didn't probe too much, but I did ask some questions to help me get a good handle on how immediate the concern was, to try to assess the immediacy of the need. And then, after following that conversation with him, I contacted the parents directly, just that quick. And so that, I think we as we apply that to an older population or maybe an adult, I think the comparison is, the parents were the closest contact for him. They were the ones that were the most immediately able to intervene and help if he was in a more desperate scenario than what it seemed he was when I spoke with him on the phone. And so, but ultimately it is desperate. Anytime someone's having the ideation, it is a serious thing. And the QPR option is really helpful. The option of asking a question, you hear the phrase, ask a question, save a life. And that's so true. And then refer that individual to someone that can help them as quickly as possible. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. That's great. We're getting close to running out of time, but I'm going to ask both of you, and you were talking about parents. Someone was asking, is there specific training for parents? Because maybe sometimes the parent might be the one person that might be the most difficult to intervene in this situation, or have the hardest time intervening in this situation.
I think definitely QPR is good for anybody, right? QPR, youth mental health first aid, is a little bit, deeper into mental health issues. But yeah, either one of those would be really good.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we have 1 minute. We want to thank you, Monica, Nathan, Mary Rapar, for getting us started on this very, very important topic. Of course, Jeff Winton, who is the impetus behind Rural Minds, and our partners at the Grange in particular. So, because they are the co-sponsors of this webinar and will be our partners working together on a on this program moving forward. It's called Growing Hope Together, and you'll hear lots more about this partnership and many of those offerings on the Rural Minds website. So I definitely encourage you to go to the Rural Minds website, and also we'll be partnering with the National Grange to support National Rural Mental Health Day on November 17th. So there will be more information on that coming up on both the Grange and the Rural Minds websites. But again, thank you to everyone. If we could throw up our results here, and we will say good night. And again, thank you for your time.